Welcome back to All Things FantomWorks, and today Audrey is going to be probably not cheering up, but asking me questions that apparently, now who asked, what was the question that was asked of the audience?
Something along the lines of if they have tried to get a hold of you and I won't let them.
Oh, okay. All right, so... Oh, this is interesting. I have not read any of the questions. I have no idea what's coming at me. And the bad part is I have no filters. I will answer anything, and I will answer it in the most honest way I can. All right, so with that being said, is this your happy face?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Audrey's happy face. Let's go. What's our first question?
So your first question is, what does Dan think about Toyota reliability and quality over the last 10 years?
All right. I actually do know a little bit about that. I know a lot more about American quality. Toyota quality Toyota is probably the finest car company in the world, and I hate to say that because I'm an all-American fan. But I'm very objective when it comes to quality. The Toyota quality is absolutely amazing. I don't like the new Toyota style. I think the grills on everything Toyota is just, it looks like the south end of a northbound dog. I think Toyota makes everything that looks the same. Toyotas are generally gas-sucking pigs as a rule. But when it comes to quality, I have to give them high marks. And although I do think they've dropped a little bit, they've focused a little bit too much on glitz and glitter. They've dropped a little bit in the last 10 years, but I would still say they're probably the highest initial quality of any car made in the world, and maybe the highest residual quality too. So very good.
So this is another question from Instagram. What's your go-to paint brand / system?
You know, we've painted every paint brand there is. We've done Ditzler, PPG, Sherwin-Williams, Acme, 3M, and quite honestly, right now we're shooting PPG. I love PPG. I loved DuPont prior. I have shot and loved Spies Hecker, German company. So I think that they're so similar. It really all has to do with which line you shoot. So all of these paint companies typically have 2 or 3 lines of paint. They've got an entry level, what's called a shop line, and then they've got a higher quality, and then some of them have a premium. We try to avoid any shop line for the most part and shoot the medium or high quality from the best companies. And the results are always fantastic. So I guess the long story short is, I don't think it matters who you shoot. Try not to buy the cheapest of what they sell. And I would avoid the really off brands that nobody's heard of because they've got nothing to lose if you buy bad paint from them.
This isn't a question, more of a statement. They said, I thought Dan was a Corvette guy.
You thought I was? What the hell's wrong with you? Of course I'm a Corvette guy. Look, I love cars. In fact, you could really say I love all things mechanical. I love phone booths and old record players and soda machines and Wurlitzers. So if it's a mechanical or electromechanical device, chances are I love it. When it comes to cars, there are some ugly ass cars out there, and there are some that I'm not a real big fan of. And I don't like a lot of modern cars, and I like virtually nothing from the 80s and 90s. But when it comes to what is my favorite car, look, it was the girl that I never thought I was going to get, and that was the C2 Corvette. The C2 Corvette is the most beautiful car ever created, and that even extends. So my top 3 most beautiful cars in the world, number 1 is a 63 split window Corvette. Number 2 is a 1962 Ferrari Series 1 GTO. And number 3 is an XKE Series 1 Coupe. After that, I almost don't think it matters. I mean, the Camaro is on my list, but it's probably down around number 10 in terms of the most beautiful. It was just the girl I was after in high school. So I am a Corvette guy. I love Corvettes. I'm not a fan of plastic C3s. I despise C4s. I don't like the newest Corvettes, the rear-engine Corvettes. I think they're a cheap knockoff of a Ferrari. I mean, I appreciate their performance. It's stunning. They're world-class performance. I don't like the look of them. I think that they cheated. And I think that Chevrolet needed to, they've always been a trendsetter with style. And on the newest Corvette, I think they looked at a Ferrari and said, let's do that. And so for that reason, I'm not a fan of the newest ones. But I am a Corvette freak, but I love Mustangs. Mustangs are gorgeous. I love Mopars. I don't think you can get a much prettier car than a Challenger, an early 70s, like a 70, 71 Challenger. And so what do you think? I mean, I'm a Corvette guy, but isn't it fair? It's like having children, right? You love all of your children. You just may, in fact, favor one over the other, right? We're not going to ask you which is your favorite. I'm not going to ask you.
We don't talk about that.
Right. And I won't say which is my favorite, but the reality is cars, I love cars like I love children. I love all of my children, but I have favorite cars, and my favorite of all cars is the Corvette. What's your favorite of all cars?
I don't have a favorite car.
You don't have
I don't.
What?
I prefer the motors. Like, not all Chryslers and Mopars look good, but they've got really nice engines. Like, I love a Hemi.
Okay, so what's your favorite looking Mopar? If you're going to have a Hemi, what would the 426 fit in?
That 33 coupe up front.
Okay, so it's a 33 Plymouth coupe that was completely custom made. So not a Cuda or a Challenger or a Charger?
They're all pretty, but they're a little bit more of a boat. They're not quite like a Lincoln or anything like that, but they're pretty big cars.
The Charger's huge. Charger's always been a big car. Okay, so you heard Audrey's strong opinion. She's more opinionated than I am. All right, next question.
I'm just going to read these. They're not really questions. These are the last of the Instagram ones. They're more just statements. Your show on TV was top-notch, equal to no other. It was real life and not a fake storyline.
Thank you. And I appreciate it, and that's because it was. You are not misreading the tea leaves on that. But that was painful to do that way, wasn't it, Audrey?
Yeah, I don't know why we're doing it again.
Well, okay, and there's, that's a different conversation than for right now. But the reality is when you shoot, like most reality is fake. It's just staged, faked, garbage, scripted reality. We didn't do that. The closest thing we came to a script is if someone behind the camera said to someone, "Tell me about the brakes. Do you like the brakes on this car?" And they would ask a question. But no one was told, you will ever say this, you will have this opinion. But that's dangerous when you're shooting TV, isn't it? Because people will say crazy stuff.
And they don't bleep out words if you use the politically correct vernacular.
Yeah. So thank you. What you saw is what you got. The customers were real. The cars were real. The bills were real. And doing that on a camera where the customers saw their car for the very first time, and most of them got their final bill for the very first time on camera, I will tell you that the stress level for me was beyond anything I could describe. It was much higher than getting shot at, and I'll just leave it at that. I would much rather have regularly been shot at than dealing with delivering cars on camera. Next question.
Like I said, these are just the statements, so I'm going to read these three really quick. You have an awesome business and your show is a blast to watch. I want to talk with Audrey. This is so cool. If it comes down to picking between you and your car, we're not picking you. We're not picking you. Best line of any car show.
Okay. Well, and so thank you. He wants to talk to Audrey. What do you have to say to this guy? Say something.
Something.
No, say something cool.
Something cool.
Oh, Audrey, you're a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
So how I would respond to that is that line of "we're not picking you," what I mean by that is the car comes first. If the car has needs, and we're specifically talking about structural safety things, I really don't care when a client says, I want a new interior when I'm looking at a chassis that is compromised. I don't care when they say, I want a paint job when I'm looking at an electrical system that's going to cause a fire. I always looked at the cars first, and if the car needed it, then we explain to the customer, you will do what the car needs first, and then if we're still friends and there's still money left in the account, then we'll take care of the desires. And you have to understand, most clients came in here always wanting cosmetics first, and they just, in many cases, almost ignored structure and safety and things like that. And it took a while for that tide to turn, and people eventually figured out that we weren't going to deal with cosmetics first. And so they finally came in and said, okay, let's take care of the safety issues, but then I want this. So what do you think? Did we build cars the right way, and do we still build cars the right way?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'd like to believe that.
Okay. I mean, would you build cars? Are you going to change things when you're in charge of the shop?
I'll change some stuff, but I think
What would you change? Oh,
itself-
good. Let's find. What is this that you're going to change? Tell me what you change.
That's a conversation for a different time.
I think it's a perfect conversation for this time.
We have so many
Give
questions.
me one thing you would change.
I don't know. There's lots of things.
Lots of things.
But
It's getting deeper. She's going to change lots of things. So what are you going to change?
it's a different conversation.
All right. Next thing.
So now we're going to YouTube.
Okay.
Somebody says, Dan, so sorry to hear about Heidi. She was an icon on the show.
Yeah, Heidi's loss was tragic in so many ways, because not only how we got her was because of family, and a very nice family, but they had small children, and they said she was an untrainable dog. Heidi was, in my opinion, the single most trained and trainable dog I've ever seen in my life. I would easily say she's smarter than some of the people I know. She was brilliant. She was good-natured. She was an amazing warning system. Who does she protect more than any human in the whole world? Melissa, my wife. If anybody tries getting between Heidi and Melissa, Heidi lets them know you're not going to do that, unless she knows you and then trusts you. So the toughest part for me, and of course this is very fresh, this was just last week, is that you always wonder, should you allow your dog to have one more day? And for me, that was the tough part, because I finally decided to do it the day after Heidi couldn't even get up to go to the bathroom. I mean, she had already had many, many accidents on herself, and we'd cleaned her up many times, but we could typically lift her to her feet and she could at least walk out and go to the bathroom. But it had gotten to the point where she couldn't even do that anymore. And so there comes a point where you say, what is the quality of life for anything, including an animal? So here is the irony, and this was just a little bizarre for me. So I bring her into the vet. We're actually laying down together on the floor waiting for the vet to come in. And darned if Heidi didn't get up and start walking around. And I'm like, oh, you're not going to do this to me, are you? And she did. And so suddenly I'm feeling like I'm just being mean. But I don't know if that was just that last spark before the bulb, goes dim. But look, it was wonderful. It was even less painful than I put a dog down about 10 years ago. And I got to tell you, those are the two hardest things you'll ever do in your life, is put two dogs down. Because you're making the decision of when they will take their last breath and have their last heartbeat. You watch your parents die, but God makes that decision, you don't. But when it comes to a dog, you unfortunately have to play the role of God. And let me tell you, that is one thing I don't envy anybody that does it, and don't ever want to do it again. With that, next.
Oh, goodness. All right. Hey there, Dan. I called your shop a few months ago and asked for some information on what the measurements would be to back half a 1949 Chevy truck with a S10 chassis. I'm going to run a 31 by 16.5 by 15 Hoosier drag radial in the rear.
All right. I'm actually glad you asked that question, and this guy brought that up. All right. Let me explain what we do here at FantomWorks. We build cars. We build cars for clients. And at any given time, how many cars do you think we have in the shop right now that are active projects? Ballpark.
40 or so.
I think it's a little more than that, but you're not far off. It's 40 to 50 projects at a time. Is that a full-time job?
Yeah.
Is it more than a full-time job?
Yes.
All right. How many hours does it take me to bring in a new car, to talk to a client, make sure they're not crazy, get the pictures, get the work orders written up? How long does it take for me to bring in every new client and you to photograph their cars and do all the database work? How many hours does that take?
Depending on the project,
Yeah.
in between, I'd say 8 to 15 hours.
That's actually about exactly what I would say. So it's a couple of days' work to bring in every new client. So when people call me up, like this man, and ask me, what are the measurements? First of all, I don't have a vehicle there. Second of all, the research I would have to do to answer the question would take me hours. And please don't take this the wrong way, but I'm backed up with work I'm doing for paying clients who are waiting for their cars. If I took on every single request asked of me to do for free, I would have to retire from this company, close down FantomWorks, and even then I wouldn't have enough time to take on all the free stuff that people ask me to do. So I'm afraid that when people ask for things that I can't do, the answer is, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I figured what I know out by doing just research and hard work and figuring out the engineering and figuring out the calculations. And I'm afraid that for a lot of people, if you want to build your own car, and I encourage you to do that, you got to figure that out for yourself. Next. I know that's mean-spirited of me, but that's the absolute unabridged truth.
But people don't do your brakes or anything like that. All right. I really appreciate FantomWorks being back. Thank you so much. I have a 1993 Jeep Cherokee XJ 4-wheel drive, 5-speed manual trans, inline 6 motor. 2 questions. Is the 4.6 stroker a worthwhile upgrade to the engine? My OEM 4.0 likely needs rebuild or replacement within a few years.
Okay.
So that's the first question.
So the first question is, without knowing the calculations, because I don't build late model 4.0s and stroke them, there's a very, very simple rule to stroking, and you cannot violate this rule, and a lot of people do. It is all about piston skirt and how far it drops below the cylinder wall. So a build that I think is a horrible build is taking a 302 Windsor and turning it into a 347. You so violate the rule of piston skirt in cylinder wall clearance that you will eat the engine up in almost no time. I mean, 347s eat themselves for breakfast. On the other hand, you take a GM 350 and you stroke it into a 383, you haven't violated the rule because Chevrolet left a little bit more cylinder wall for you to drop the piston lower into the and toward the crankshaft. So long story short, what it's all about is how far that wrist pin comes down into the cylinder wall. And if you're stroking it in such a way that you can physically move that piston left and right when it's at the bottom of the stroke, don't build that as a stroker motor. Next question he had.
Are the 4-port or 12-port fuel injectors upgrades worthwhile versus sticking with the OEM single port?
All right. And look, my name's not Google. When it comes to cars built from World War II to 1973, I would try and match my knowledge against almost anyone in the world. My pre-war is a little bit less, but after 1973, I stopped caring because we stopped making good cars in America. When the oil embargo hit, we jammed so many plastics and did so many bad things to cars that there was nothing built good for 2 decades. So basically, from the early 70s to the early 90s, we built the world's worst, ugliest, horriblest, poorest performing, unreliablest, cars the world has ever seen. We started building good cars again in America in the early to mid 90s. So we had a 20-year hiatus. But that hiatus in building good quality cars was long enough that I stopped caring about them. And I focused really on the cars of World War II to 1973. So I'm going to plead complete ignorance on that. I have no idea. And quite honestly, I hope to never learn the answer to that question, because I don't care about them.
All right. This one's a little bit long. I own a 1964 Buick Skylark convertible. I have owned it about 5 years now and finally have it running well enough for a road trip. I live in Massachusetts and drove it on a 2,000-mile round trip to South Carolina this May and even stopped at FantomWorks. It has a Wildcat 310 engine, all factory original. The carb is just, for lack of a better term, junk. Although it's been rebuilt, it just doesn't seem to like modern crappy gas that is sold here in Massachusetts. I have purchased a factory original 1964 aluminum 4-barrel intake. It has been cleaned up and pressure tested. It is in good shape. I'm trying to decide whether to put an Edelbrock 4-barrel carb, 500 or 600 CFM, or switch to a Fit Tech EFI.
All right. So there's a lot of things there, and let me try and address them all. Number one, carburetor rebuilding is basically no longer possible. These carburetors are so old, a rebuild, which is just a soft part, a cleaning and soft part, is no longer enough. We no longer rebuild carburetors. We restore them or we don't restore them. And that's a big word, because a rebuild takes an hour and a half, and a restoration is probably a 6 or 8 or 10 or 12-hour ordeal that involves machine work and bench flowing and throttle shaft, axle, basically throttle shaft rod clearance and bushings. So you can't compare the two. So if you've only been rebuilding, then I'm going to suggest you find someone who will actually do a restoration of the carburetor. So that's number one. If you are going to change the carburetor out, my favorite carburetor go-to today for overall drivability is the AVS2, the newest Edelbrock line. They're actually quite brilliant. Because you're only dealing with 310 cubic inches, you're probably going to want to stick with around a 500 CFM carburetor. Over carbureting, and I'd have to look at some specs, but I would probably just asked right here, blind, probably push you toward a 500 rather than a 600 CFM. You are always better with a slightly smaller carburetor than a slightly larger carburetor. Overfueling will destroy an engine. People do it all the time. Everybody shoves a 1,000 CFM monster on their car thing. It'll go faster, and all it does is destroy their damned engine and makes it run like crap and creates vacuum issues and everything else. As far as EFI, I am not a fan of aftermarket EFI. The only aftermarket EFI that I have discovered that the company stands behind, it's trustworthy, it actually works, is the Holley Sniper, the Series 3 that is out now. Generally speaking, it is the best. So if you're going to do aftermarket fuel injection, that's the one I'd recommend. Nothing else.
All right.
That was a lot of questions in one.
Yeah. All right, so this one's a little tricky too.
Okay.
Is more than 3 engine/transmission mounts too many? I have a 1993 Cummins 5.9 that I'm looking to install a Spicer 7-speed transmission behind in my 1981 Dodge Crew Cab. There are no mounting points for the transmission. It hangs off the back of a .3 bell housing, which has 2 frame mounts attached. That leaves me with 2 engine mounts and 2 bell housing mounts. Will this cause frame stress?
All right. Obviously, I'm not real familiar with that configuration because, again, we don't build 80s and 90s stuff. But let me give you sort of a basic rule of thumb. If the engine and transmission were ever designed, like if you go back to a lot of the cars from the 50s, they actually didn't have forward transmission mounts. So they were stressed in such a way that only 2 mounts on the front of the engine and 1 mount at the back of the transmission, forming a triangle, was just fine. And if the engine and transmission were ever coupled together like that, then you have no issue recoupling them together and using 3 points. In terms of the stress on the 1981 chassis. Torque is what actually kills, not horsepower. Everybody always loves the horsepower number, but it's torque that is actually the rotational forces that twist chassis, that twist drive shafts. So I don't know how many pound-feet of torque you're going to be producing with that Cummins, but Cummins they're torque monsters. So I'm going to take a wild ass guess, you're going to be somewhere in the 400 to 600, depending on how you built it, what fuel map you drop on it, the injectors and everything else. So if you are in fact up around 500 pound-feet of torque, you plan on using it. In other words, you've got big tires and gearing such that you're planning to stick that foot into the pedal and actually try and rip those rear tires loose, then torque is a huge effect. And all I can say is over-engineer rather than under-engineer. Whether it's 3 points or 5 is kind of a moot point. If it only requires 3 points, just make sure they are 3 really hardcore points and you'll be just fine. But those the Cummins are incredible torque motors, and you could rip it out of the chassis if it's not stressed enough. So I haven't given you a specific answer because I don't understand your configuration quite well enough, but you are right. Torque, diesels, they are best friends, and if you don't do that right, I see motor mounts on some little Ford Windsors that they're literally 3/4 inch solid steel bars, like a single 3/4 inch. You ain't getting away with that on a Cummins turbo or even a Cummins non-turbo diesel. You're going to find an engine on the road and a truck somewhere else. So,
all right, now on to Facebook questions. This isn't really a question. The only thing about asking for an opinion is being prepared for the answer. Glad to see the team still popping up on my feed. Best wishes from the UK.
Okay. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to respond to that or if a response is necessary. So thank you so much from the UK for watching. Get all your friends to watch us, and we're doing a lot of filming these days. Stay tuned. We've actually filmed an entire season of episodes, and right now it's all those big ugly negotiations about where they're going to go and where they're going to get aired. But they're done. They're in the can. We just got to figure out exactly where they're going. So thank you for staying tuned.
All right, next one. I called about refreshing my 87 GT. It has over 160,000 miles on it, and there is no interest by FantomWorks.
No.
I had been interested in engine overhaul / refreshing. I suppose not enough money for them with a non-metal or fiberglass auto.
Oh, okay. We don't do 87 cars. We just don't. We have got thousands of people in line to come in here. And we've got thousands of cars that we want to bring in here, like Camaros and Grand Sports and Mustangs and Chargers and Challengers. So why would we think of going to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and trying to beat them up about bringing you a Wendy's hamburger? They just don't want to. And it isn't a matter of, well, this isn't enough money for you to go get me a Wendy's hamburger. We don't serve Wendy's hamburgers at Ruth's Chris. So we're not going to do a 1987. And if all you're looking for is an engine build, then go to an engine build shop. There are engine build shops in every town. You don't need to bring that to us. We don't do 87s. It isn't a money thing. You're in the wrong restaurant, sitting at the wrong table, and wondering why we're not giving you fried chicken and Wendy's when you're sitting in a restaurant that doesn't serve fried chicken and Wendy's. Next.
This has a question mark on it, but it doesn't make sense to me.
Okay.
This is what it says. My 24 couple, no car, has a GM 4.3 HO V-6
Okay.
and a TH 350 with a Holly 4-barrel. Is it worth the expense to put FL on it?
Okay. So he's got a 4.3 liter with a turbo 350 and a carburetor, and he's wondering if he should put fuel injection on it.
How did you get that from that?
I've learned how to read customer and understand customer for years. So the answer is, it's all about your carburetor and whether you like a carburetor and you understand how to set a choke and drive a carburetor. I love carburetors. I really do. I do not like aftermarket fuel injection because if you ever have a problem, you've got a monstrous problem. So it's one of those where reliability, if you get a shop or get someone to set up your aftermarket fuel injection correctly and everything stays perfect, then it is more reliable than a carburetor and you will get better performance than a carburetor. But if you don't have carburetor performance issues and you don't have, you're not going to get a lot of power by going to a fuel injection, you get a little bit, then I would say the juice is not worth the squeeze, and I would say absolutely not. I just wouldn't do it. So that's my opinion, and other people would tell you, oh, you have to have fuel injection. I can't tell you, how many cars have we brought in here with badly done fuel injection that nobody could figure out, that we had to unscrew and in most cases throw the fuel injection in the garbage and start all over again?
About 90% of the ones that came in with fuel injection.
Yeah, it happens all the time. So I'm not a fan of aftermarket fuel injection, and I'm really not a fan of badly set up aftermarket fuel injection. So.
All right. What is...
Oh, hang on. One more thing. I'm sorry. And if you don't know how to set it up and you don't understand fuel maps and idle air control motors and going from closed loop or open loop to closed loop, if you don't understand all those things, and I freely admit, I don't know, I'm not a computer programmer for fuel injection because I'm a carburetor guy myself. I have other guys that do the fuel injection stuff. But if you're not way more knowledgeable than I am, then don't even think about it.
What is a driver quality 1970 Chevelle SS 454 worth?
Okay, wait a second.
The car has no supporting documentation that is indeed an SS, and for that matter, an LS6. I also know that the 454 in the car was rebuilt. It's a truck motor. It was a rebuilt truck motor.
All right, so that actually answered most of the question. So he changed all the dynamics when he said it's got a truck motor. So a documented LS6 1970 Chevelle, first of all, that car holds, in my opinion, two records. The first one, which doesn't matter to anybody but me, I think it's the single most beautiful full-size muscle car ever created in the world. And I would consider it a full-size muscle car. It is a full-frame car. Chevelles were a high initial quality car, higher than the Camaros that I love, probably second only to the Corvettes in the GM line. Chevelles are stunning. Of all the GM A bodies, of which, of course, the Chevelle, it was, the Chevelle, the GTO, the Le Mans, the 442. Chevelles are the most beautiful. And the most desirable of all Chevelles is that car. But if it doesn't have any documentation, it's not an original motor, then it's just a 1970 Chevelle. So what that means is it's still the most beautiful GM A-body full-sized muscle car ever built and the best year of it. And so now it's just a matter of what do you do about the engine? So what do I think? I think without the documentation, it's a 1970 Chevelle. And then you just price it based on what a 1970 Chevelle is worth. And that really comes down to an inspection. Is it rusted? Is it smashed? Is it dented? How much stuff is missing? Because the answer to that question could be anywhere from a low of maybe a dirt bag car of 10 grand to an absolute breathtaking icon that could probably today bring $250,000 or more. And if it was a real LS6, more than that. Next.
Okay, this is just a statement, but it's nice. A few years back, I tried to contact a few of the big builders to see about a build. Never heard back from any of them except Dan. Dan called me himself and we talked a while. I have great respect for Dan and he is a great guy. Thanks, Dan.
I appreciate that. I do actually, so here's the only people I don't call back. And we get a lot of submissions. I mean, we get thousands of them. So there's really only two categories of people that I don't call back. One is when people are insulting. And I know it sounds crazy, but do we get some insulting stuff written? I mean, just just ridiculous, insulting stuff. And it's like, all right, if you're just going to be insulting, I'm not even going to waste my time with you. And the second one is if someone writes back and they're looking for $200,000 worth, 3 years worth of work with $50,000 in parts, and they say, I've got a budget of 10 grand. Are you ever going to fix that person?
No.
Is it worth wasting your time to re-educate that human being?
No, because they just want to argue about it.
That's it. They will, well, why can't you do this? Because nobody can except God. And we're not God. We're never going to try and be God. God is God, and we can't give you 2 years worth of work or 3 years worth of work and $100,000 worth of parts for 10 grand, no matter how many times you ask, beg, call me names, or goad me into it. So I actually call everybody else back. So this is probably someone who wasn't outrageous or insulting, but we just weren't able to come together on it. Right. But thank you for that comment.
All right.
And by the way, I spend, unfortunately, about probably an average of 2 to 5 hours a day dealing with client calls and new potential client calls.
I would like to restore a Healey, but I'm 6'4". When I get a chance to sit in some at shows, I do not fit.
Nope.
Is it even possible to find the room to make it so that I can fit?
So the answer to that is the juice won't be worth the squeeze. Healey's are gorgeous cars, and I love them. And if somebody came to me and said, let's chop my Healey and add a 6-inch section, because that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to lengthen the doors by 6 inches. You'd have to lengthen the body by 6 inches. And then, of course, lengthen everything else, wiring harnesses and drive shafts and all that stuff. Is it possible? It is absolutely possible. There's a thing called anthropometrics, which is body shape. So if all of your height is above your waist or whether it's below your waist. And so I would have to see someone sitting in a car to figure out if all their height is up top and we stretch the car, but now their head is 19 inches over the top of the windshield, they're just going to look goofy going down the road anyway. So long story short, I would say that because of the value of a Healey, chopping one up would not be advised. And if you have that kind of money and you want to chop one up and realize that once you chop it up, you're basically making a potentially $200,000 car worth almost nothing. If you've got that kind of money and that kind of, and you would fit in it afterwards, then I would say, then for you, it's a good decision. But realize that car is going to be a one-off custom car for you, and you're probably never going to be able to sell it to anyone after that.
Okay. Dan, I'm running Evans waterless coolant and temps in the 210 to 240 range without a thermostat. Acceptable, or should I switch back to normal coolant? The normal temp was 180.
Oh, okay, so the 210. I don't get upset about 210. I start getting really concerned above 220. Remember, the boiling point of water is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So as you exceed 212, it all has to do with the pressure in the system. No engine loves 240, none. They can tolerate it. Now it would be, what is your engine? Have you got a cast iron? Like cast iron big blocks can handle greater temperatures than cast iron small blocks. Aluminum engines do not like being really, really hot. They'll warp. And I've literally watched people with 240 destroy an engine because they'll warp the head. I've actually seen a warped block. I didn't think it was possible to warp a block with heat, but it is. You can warp the head, blow the head gasket, and warp a block. So not knowing what engine you have, I can't respond other than to say 240 is unacceptable. And if you're getting temperatures of 240, then you have other problems other than water and coolant. All right, let me try and give you the very quick version of a very complex subject. Air molecules must pass only through the radiator. So if you've got air molecules coming the other way, so take yourself some incense and put it into the engine bay and see if the engine bay, if your incense is being sucked into the fan. If it is, you've got a bad system. If you've got incense that gets sucked in anywhere around the radiator other than through the cooling fins, you've got a bad cooling system. If you don't have a good shroud on it, you've got a bad cooling system. If your fan blades are not within about a quarter of an inch of the edge of the opening in the fan shroud, you've got a bad cooling system. So there's 20 things to look at, and the waterless, or these wetter waters and all these other things, they'll buy you a few degrees. They are not solving a 40-degree problem. And so, my friend, you have other things to look at besides what you're actually putting into the radiator. You need to look super hard at air molecules and then at water flow. And so start with air, go to water flow next, then you can go to what you're putting in the radiator. That's your last priority.
All right, next. 57 GMC pickup I want to rebuild, as I want it to have a modern ride and handling. What would be a front suspension recommendation? All
right, so the very quick, easy answer is Mustang 2, right? It is the world's best, and you got to give Ford and whoever the designer was at Ford that created the Mustang 2, they kind of changed the world of cars. So now it's a matter of, is the engine going to be happy with only a cradle? And so here's going to be a recommendation for you. If you're actually putting a lot of torque, because remember, back in the day, and what year was this?
57.
57. So by 57, of course, GM had introduced the 283. It was first year of the 283. Not super torquey motors. The 283 probably was pushing mid to high 200s, even in its most aggressive form. So we're not talking about a truck that was designed for a very torquey motor. So I don't know what you're talking about, whether you're talking about an LS or a Coyote or just dropping in a small block 350. If you're talking about a small block, you could drop in a Mustang 2 front end as long as you know what you're doing with respect to steering and oil pan clearance, and you'll be just fine. If you don't know what you're doing, or you've got a big high horsepower motor you're going to drop into it, you need to call Fat Man Fab and see if they can build you a chassis, because they could build you a chassis that, as long as you're not trying to go drag race with 14-inch, wide slicks on the ass end with, sticky on the tires, you're going to be just fine. So be careful about, look, people make this mistake all the time. I'm going to tell a quick story of the $6 Million Man. All right, so I was like 8 years old when the show The $6 Million Man came out, and I was pissed off as an 8-year-old. And here's why. So the guy that was the $6 Million Man, what was his name? Lee?
I feel like you were born angry.
You need to look at your face. No, the $6 Million Man really pissed me off because he had bionic legs, which would account for him being able to move his legs fast. He had a bionic right arm. He did not have a bionic pelvis, a bionic spine, bionic scapulas, or bionic shoulders. He had regular human spine and shoulders. So how could he lift a car over his head when his spine would have snapped? And so I saw that when I was 8 years old and said, they didn't build this guy right. They needed to give him all sorts of titanium parts throughout his body so that he could actually lift a car over his head. Well, I can't tell you how many people build cars just like Lee. What's his last name? Lee Majors. Lee Majors and the $6 Million Man would have broken the first time he tried to do anything. Many of the cars that come in here are exactly the same. They've got all sorts of really cool go-fast garbage on them, and they haven't integrated the system. So look at more than just the steering and front end. Remember that 1955 has a very antiquated leaf spring rear end on it. So you've also got a C-channel chassis that was never designed for more than probably around 250 pound-feet of torsional forces. So if you are in fact going to try and build a very strong truck, you need to start looking at making sure that everything comes up. You need a rear end, rear suspension, drive shaft, transmission, engine, chassis, front end, steering, and suspension, that all comes up together. Otherwise, you're just going to build another Frankenstein that looks good and won't go down the road. Or it'll go down the road and it'll scare the living hell out of you, which a lot of the cars we see do. They're just scary.
All right, next. Not a build question, but a shop question. I've been to your place. How do you do it? I am an overstressed shop owner. We specialize in transmissions, but get all kind of old and unique vehicles and hard to make money.
Yeah. Look, I probably my favorite compliment I've ever had from a man, and it's not real far from this, is I had a guy come in here, and this was about 7 years ago, and he looked around, and he took the tour, and he said, we have 7 bays in our shop, and when we were only a 2-bay shop, we made a little bit of money, and we figured we'd make more money by going to 7 cars. He said, we are now losing money at an unbelievable rate, and we're working harder. We can't keep track of everything. It's hard to know what employee is doing what, how to log hours, how to track parts, how to... Audrey, how many parts on a daily basis do you manage parts for?
How many cars?
Yeah, projects, cars and projects.
All of them.
All of them. 40, 50 cars simultaneously.
Yes.
Is our database a big part of how you're able to do that?
Yes.
Okay, but it still takes a lot of management and work on your part. So when this man said to me, he goes, I have no idea how you can manage, because at the time we had about 80 to 90 cars in here. He said, I have no idea how you do this. We've got 10% of what you have and we've lost money. So I'm going to take that as a compliment. I think it was meant as one. And I guess my response would be, I've got a great friend of mine, a man named Ray Steff, who spent a lot of time. I architected the database. He wrote the code for it. He's a genius. We have a database that helps us. It's just a management tool. But does it take a lot of work to stay on top of all of these builds simultaneously?
Yes.
It does. Now, do you make a lot of money doing it? No. Anybody who thinks that FantomWorks makes a lot of money is delusional. And if you want to come down here and show me how I'm stupid and how I could do it better, feel free to come down. We make a little bit of money. At the end of the day, if for every dollar that a client pays us, I write checks for an average of about 98 cents. So we tend to average around a 2 to 2.5% profit margin. And it's because of the number of cars we have. There is simply no way to manage all of this. And now I'll call it the Chinese factor, and it's been bad for the last 3 years. We had a 20 to 30% parts issue prior to the scamdemic. And since the scamdemic has come out, we now have, I would call it a 30 to 50% parts issue. They're either not available, or we have to wait and re-manage maintenance as a result of the wait, or they come in and they're broken, or they come in the wrong package, or they come in and they don't even fit the vehicle. The last 3 years have been absolutely horrible and a maintenance nightmare, which is why we went from doing 80 cars to about 45, because with the parts problems we're having today, that's tough but manageable, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you think? Do you think it's... So let me ask you that question. Mm-hmm. Managing 45 cars, because I don't know another shop in the world that manages this many cars in a restoration shop. So do you think it's done fairly well here?
I think we already went over that, yeah. That was along the same lines as the question from earlier.
Okay, but is it without problems? Do we have problems?
No, we work with
a
bunch of people.
Well, okay, do we leave problems? I would agree, no. But do we have challenges and problems that face us every day managing this many cars?
Yeah.
Yeah. Clients will routinely They will, I'll just give you a perfect example. They'll call one of us up and go, hey, I was thinking last night, I would really like a stripe in metallic blue with some black outline, and I would really like some bass boat letters saying this, and I want that on the hood. And you're listening to this going, okay, what crazy show did you watch last night? But I will always say to them, look, I need you to write that down and email that to me very specifically, and then I'll look at it. And sometimes they'll forget, and then they'll come 3 months later, where's my bass boat letters that were supposed to be on my hood? And I'm like, oh, that's right, you said that. Did you ever email me? No, I forgot to email you, but I figured you'd do it. And you're like, no. So change orders when you've got 45 cars are a nightmare. And that's one of the things that we face every day. And it's change orders driven mostly by clients, but 20% of our change orders are driven by the cars themselves because they present things that it's like, this part isn't available, or this part is broken, and the substitute requires us to do ABC. So we deal with change orders on 45 cars, and that to me is our single biggest challenge. What's your single biggest challenge with the number of cars we have in here? Besides hating me.
Getting the guys to kind of do their logistics.
Oh.
Because me doing all of it is really difficult. And so I need them to put their stuff in and all of that. And when they don't, and then they're like, why didn't you order it? And I'm like, why didn't you do your part?
Yeah.
Like,
So we have an interesting logistics system. The tech is required to go into the database, and they don't have to know everything, but they at least have to give us a reasonable, educated guess. You know, hey, I need an intake for a Windsor for a 1965 Mustang, and I want aluminum or cast iron, or I want OEM or aftermarket. They have to give us some basics to give us a fighting chance. And then Audrey takes that request and goes out and does the research, and then if there's questions, you bring it back to the tech. But many times the guys, they'll just sort of pass by, hey, Audrey, I need an intake, and then they'll walk away. And I'll look at her and I'm like, don't worry about it. They'll come back to you.
all right. The next one is Scott Barnhouse. And this is a long one.
Okay.
2000 S10 extended cab, 5.7 Vortex swap, 4L60E, wider second gen Camaro 8.5 differential with a limited slip and a 488 gear. 35s.
Wait, stop.
I didn't.
You didn't really just say 488 gear.
Yeah.
Okay, that's insane. Keep going. That's just insane.
It gets better. 35s on 15 by 14 Barts, daily driver with ice cold AC, 10-inch Fad Tech lift. Could have bolted on 33s and sent it down the road, but I wanted 35s. That made it.
Why drive it when you can look at it instead? Okay.
That made it snowball into 6-inch flared trophy truck fenders.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have to pull the bed sides. I also have to modify the lift control arms. I actually think I have to build new upper control arms to get the geometry right. It's almost like I hate myself. Gotta have those 35s, right?
I understand that. I understand hating yourself. I would hate you too if you gave that to me. Okay, keep going.
Is it worth the extra effort, even if it quadruples the work? I'm building this for my Navy son. He's local to you. I'll have him drive it by when it's done next year.
Okay, the first question I'd ask is, what did your son do to you? All right, Scott. There's a Saturday Night Live skit that's coming to mind right now. I won't say it. Wow, where do I start here? This is an interesting one. All right. 488s, you need to have 45-inch tall tires to justify 48 gears. So I'm not sure why you have so overgeared the vehicle. This is what year S10?
2000.
It's a 2000 S10. I want to see a picture of this. I just want to see a picture of it. It would be like saying, hey, we just found a girl. She's got measurements of, 90 30, 90. I would be like, I gotta see that just to believe what that human being would look like. I need to see pictures of this truck just so that I can gawk at it.
Nicki Minaj build.
Yeah, this is, wow. All right, so there are so many red flags on the play. I don't even know if the game can continue. I feel like saying, look, we're just weathered out, or the quarterback's pregnant. We're just gonna go off the field today, because that's kind of where I feel like we're going with this one. If you're gonna make upper custom control arms, which was one of the many, many things that you mentioned, Scott, you realize that you've got 3 points in space that cannot change. And that is the inner forward, inner rear point of articulation, and the outer center ball joint mount. So I don't understand why you'd build custom upper control arms, and unless you called me, and I'm not sure that I want to deal with that, but unless you explain to me exactly why you would build custom control arms, I've got a feeling you're about to run into a radical bump steer geometry problem that there will be no fix without undoing everything. There's a couple rules of suspension that people violate absolutely all the time. One rule is that the ball joint location relative to the control arm bushing location has to maintain a standard. Okay, there's a mathematical formula there that if you try and violate it, 2 + 2 will not equal 5, no matter how many times you try and convince people that it does. So it's not going to work. The other rule you must abide by is lower control arm angle, which is the angle from the lower control arm inner sway bar, or inner bushings to that ball joint must parallel the outer tie rod. And if you violate that, you're going to hate yourself. I mean, you're going to look at yourself in the mirror and punch the mirror. So if you understand all those rules, like if you're saying, well, yeah, I get all those, then okay, at least we've got a basic understanding. If you don't understand those rules about those basic angles, stop. Just put down the control arm and step back, sir. Because what you're going to end up creating, and we see a lot of them come in here, is engineering nightmares that are just scary to drive. How many scary vehicles have we brought in here that at 20 miles an hour, I'm literally sucking the seat up in my fourth point of contact because I'm not sure I'm going to make it back to the shop without driving into a car on the side of the road.
I think the simple answer would be just put the 33s on the truck and call it done.
Well, but I think there's bigger issues than that. It's geared wrong. He's talking about control arm modifications.
But he wants to do the control arm modifications because he wants to put 35s on it.
35s do not require you to change the control arms. They just don't. So changing tires, that's what I'm getting at. Changing from 33s to 35s have nothing to do with control arms unless you've got something that I've never seen before, but I would bet a lot of money that no change of control arms will highly affect 33s to 35s unless you're talking about just making stronger control arms. And maybe that's what you're talking about, but since you didn't say that, I'm grasping at straws here. So I think you hate yourself today if, right? I mean, he said that, right? He said He hates himself. Right? And I understand why. And I think
he says it's almost like he hates himself.
Well, it's almost like, well, maybe you just should hate yourself. Maybe you should just accept the fact that, this is not going right. Look, I don't know how bad it is, but based on what you wrote, it doesn't sound good. And I would never build that vehicle and give it to somebody else because from my perspective, the liability and the morality issues would be a big thing. I don't want to ever hand the keys to someone that I don't think they can safely get in the vehicle and not just get around the block. I want them to be able to drive down the freeway at 70 miles an hour, and when the moron to your side cuts you off, or the tire comes off the car in front of you, or something falls out of the pickup and you've got to swerve, I want someone to have a controllable vehicle under austere or exigent circumstances, and it sounds like you're building a vehicle that may not meet those requirements. So I'm not a fan. So here's what I would say. I'm gonna make you an offer. Now, I don't want to work on the truck. If you can bring that thing down here, how far is it from here?
I have no idea. Next time, make this vodka.
Oh, it's in Florida. Okay, that sucks. But the sun is here, right? Yeah. Okay, so the sun is here. So obviously the vehicle will have to get transported here. I'll do this for you for nothing. You call me, you call Audrey, you make an appointment, and whatever you do before you give it to your son, since he's in the local area, bring it by. I will go out and let me drive it around the block with you. Let me look at what you've done. And if it is a safe and great vehicle, absolutely, I will give you the thumbs up. And I am not critical of good work. I am critical of scary engineering. And that's why I'm very concerned, because unfortunately it sounds like we've got a bunch of scary engineering going on. If it's good work, I will give you full praise. In fact, maybe on one of these I'll sing your praises. But I will give you the thumbs up if it's solid work that's correctly engineered, and I'll offer that to you about any time. Just make it Monday through Friday, kind of daytime hours, and I'll do that for you. After that last question, it feels like I'm somewhere between giving birth and having a kidney stone, and I've done one of the two, and I'll let you figure out which one that is. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone. We didn't answer every question. We're not going to try and answer every single one because we'd be on here for hours. But keep sending your questions, and we'll pick from. We'll take like 45 minutes to an hour of the best questions. I let everybody else decide. I don't get to see them ahead of time. I figure that way it's more candid. Please stay tuned. If this video does well enough, we'll be glad to do more of them. And the next podcast we're going to do is on, I think crazy is the word that you guys like to use. I like to use insanely stupid. That's not a word, that's a phrase. I'm going to talk about the insanely stupid requests that we've gotten. And it's going to take me a while to sort of sift through them because there are literally thousands of them. And I just got to sort of figure out which ones are the best, but we'll talk about them. And I'll be honest, I will be drinking a little bit before we talk about them because that's the only way I can get through these without actually getting angry, because some people out there, I can't even come up with a metaphor. It would be like if, let me see if I can come up with something as ludicrous. If someone at a restaurant, if the wait staff of a restaurant came up to you and said, "Well, ma'am, it looks like you've been eating all day long, including cakes and everything else. Are you sure you still want to eat more?" I mean, what would your response be to that?
Give me another cookie.
Okay, well, maybe you'd be nice. And that's kind of some of the questions we get. They're just so ludicrous. So that's our next podcast. So stay with us for all things FantomWorks. It'll be Audrey in her normal, absolutely chipper, cheery self. Look at that. Look at that face. And me. Sorry, you got to deal with me. And we'll see you next.
Face.
We'll see you next time on All Things FantomWorks.